For the past few years, something has been happening in the Nether on 2b2t. A large opening, 3 blocks tall, was getting excavated. But this wasn't just some small area for a little project. No, the area that was cleared was 10,000 by 10,000 blocks. Pulling something like this off, near spawn, and especially on an anarchy server with no rules, almost seems like an impossible feat. So, how was this done? And more importantly, why? Today, we're going to take a deep look into the highly secretive Nether spawn excavation project on 2b2t. Many of you already know that the Nether is very important for traveling to overworld bases on 2b2t, so much so that highways were constructed in the Nether that go all the way to the overworld border and beyond. But we won't be talking about those today. Instead, we're going to stick to the general spawn region of the Nether. Since the Nether became enabled on 2b2t, the spawn region has always been a pretty hazardous place. It's a mess of random blocks, bridges, and lava. Not to mention, there's almost always hunters waiting for you to appear. But walk, say, 1,000 blocks out, and you'd be greeted with this, a maze of narrow tunnels that players built over the years. These tunnels were usually messy, difficult to navigate, and were often too small to travel on horseback. If only the Nether could be more like the overworld, where the terrain is relatively flat and easy to navigate, so you can just travel in a straight line to your destination. Well, in 2017, a player that will remain unnamed as per his request had that exact vision. Dig out a huge area around 0 in the Nether to make it much easier to travel around the spawn region, and most importantly, make the whole area horse friendly. Now, even though Housemaster recently disabled moving entities through portals, back then this was still possible, as well as the entity speed movement exploit being in full swing. All you had to do was get on a horse, activate entity speed, and you were off to the races. But even without this hack, it would still make traveling so much easier, even on foot. So here was the plan. Dig out an area 5,000 blocks out in each direction from 0 that's 3 blocks tall. This would give players direct access to coordinates up to 40,000 blocks in the overworld, as 1 block traveled in the Nether equals 8 blocks in the overworld. But digging an area that big would also equate to 300 million netherrack that would have to be excavated. That's a lot of blocks to mine, especially for one person. But despite that, he started clearing out a space a few thousand blocks away from 0 just to avoid attention from spawn hunters. He did the digging completely by hand, with efficiency 5 on breaking 3 diamond pickaxes. But even with the instamine of the netherrack, it was still very tedious. After 6 months and 3 million netherrack mined, a grand total of 1% of the project was complete. After all this, he got the realization that this was going to take a lot more time than he expected, so he decided to take a break from the project. For a whole year, the project was at a standstill. That was until July of 2019. One of his friends taught him how to use a mod called Baritone, which can automatically mine out huge areas without any user input. He saw huge potential with this mod, and decided to try it out on the Nether Excavation project. So it was back to work, but this time, all he had to do was sit back and watch as Baritone did the work. However, even with this automation, it would still take an extremely long time to complete. Plus, there were a few other issues that came up with Baritone. There were times where it would randomly freeze the player in place for no reason, or would get confused with the nether portals, sometimes actually causing the player to go through the portal and walk back to the same coordinates, but in the overworld. But more commonly, other players at spawn would often try to kill him while Baritone was working. But one of the craziest situations that Baritone caused was interference with the obsidian highways built by the now defunct highway building group, the IIS. Because the guardrails of the highways were technically in the path that Baritone was trying to excavate, it mined them out anyways. So the IIS thought that he was intentionally griefing the highways, even though it was just an oversight with Baritone. These issues stacked up, and needed to get resolved to make any sort of fast progress with this project. So he decided to form a new group, the Nether Roof Freedom Project. Eventually, a whole bunch of volunteers joined the team and started using their own instances of Baritone to excavate. A spreadsheet was also created to allocate the workload to the individual volunteers. One of the volunteers also happened to be the head developer of Baritone, Lee Jerv. He saw the issues mentioned previously and started making changes to it that really helped out with the overall efficiency of the project. Now, because this excavation project was so close to spawn, effort was put in place for it to be done very secretively to avoid attention from spawn hunters, other PvP groups, and just to avoid all other attention so more focus can be made on the actual excavation project. So many of the volunteers used an auto disconnect mod where if another player popped into render distance, the client would automatically disconnect itself from the server and would reconnect once the player passed by. This made it so nobody could even see that Netherrack was actively getting dug out, which really helped keep the players anonymous. Lee Jerv also made it so blocks such as obsidian wouldn't be mined, which certainly made the highway builders happy. At one point during the project, the God Mode exploit was in full swing, which allowed volunteers to mine while invisible and invincible, so they wouldn't even have to log off every time someone happened to come into render distance. Those hacks combined with unbreakable pickaxes made the progress go even faster, but unfortunately, these exploits eventually came to an end. Housemaster patched unbreakable pickaxes and God Mode, which made the group have to go back to using regular pickaxes and logging off if someone appeared in render distance. But the group carried on, and on August 9th, 2020, 2.5 years later, the final block of Netherrack was mined, marking the completion of the Nether Roof Freedom project. The difference compared to the maze of tunnels that stood here once before is like night and day. It's now so much easier to travel to spawn bases in the overworld, and it's all thanks to this small, mysterious group that pulled this off. What they did here is nothing short of incredible. If you thought the Spawn Mason logo was impressive, well, I'd say this tops that. The Nether Roof Freedom project took over 100 times longer to build and is actually helpful to everyone's quality of life on 2b2t. So why did this unnamed player start this project in the first place? Well, he was just bored and didn't want to waste his time creating a base that was bound to be destroyed. It seemed more worthwhile to create something that players traveling around spawn could use forever. Maybe one day it'll be expanded, but we'll just have to see about that.